Okay, so here we go with another PowerPoint presentation about Monkey, also known as Journey to the West. And I'm going to focus on interpreting Monkey as a literary work. And so you saw the picture there of your heroes. Just in some broad terms, as usual, I start with, looking at the novel as a whole and some of the interpretations that have been made. And so, of course, it has been viewed as a satire, with bureaucracy in particular being a target. And I'm going to talk more about that on another slide. It can be viewed as a pilgrimage tale. And really, a lot of the novels we're reading this semester can be viewed as pilgrimage tales. As travel narratives, literally travel narratives, but also in a pilgrimage, of course, the goal is transcendence and transformation and metamorphosis toward piety. And you can see that happens in Monkey. If you have gotten to the end of it, you'll see. So there are parallels to the Golden Ass, of course. The emphasis on metamorphosis, people and things and demons and animals changing form constantly, and deities doing it as well. The interest in transcendence and as a pilgrim, the sort of episodic, picaresque structure of both novels. It's a series of episodes and adventures that are, some of which are sort of self-contained. The transcendence and the finale, the way it ends, the way that both novels end with sort of pious, holy, sacred gestures. As a religious text, or as a text about religion. Obviously, there's been a lot of study and scholarship about that. I read somewhere about a Japanese scholar who has said that the novel manifests, quote, human liberation from mystery and progress from the medieval world to the spirit of modernity. And so obviously we can compare that to the Decameron, the movement from a medieval culture to a more modern culture, is represented in both novels. Scholars have pointed out that the ordeals that the pilgrims go through, that the pilgrims being Tripitaka, Monkey, Sandy, Pigsy, and actually the horse as well, the ordeals that they go through provide the necessary expiatory experience for Tripitaka and his followers. So without those ordeals, they couldn't ascend and climb the chain of being and become more pious as they do at the end. It's been pointed out that the novel illustrates over and over again the Buddhist notion that you can't trust the senses. Things are not what they seem. Boy, I mean, that's almost like an alternate title for this novel. Things are not what they seem. Things are always changing form and turning out to be different than they first appeared. And there's plentiful examples of that in the novel. And so the Tripitaka needs his disciples, these pilgrims, for protection, and they need him for redemption, for religious Buddhist redemption. Okay. And so I've read a few particular interpretations of the novel Monkey, and so I just want to kind of sketch those out for you to show you how specific aspects of novels and specific incidents of a novel like this can be interpreted. And so one of the articles I consulted is called An Anatomy of the Political Satire in Shi-Yu-Chi, also known as Monkey, also known as Journey to the West. Obviously, Shi-Yu-Chi is the Chinese title, by Sherman Han. And so it's a pretty good title. It's kind of self-explanatory. You can see where he's going with this. And so he provides, Sherman Han provides some interesting context about Ming Dynasty emperors during Wu Shang'an's lifetime. The first emperor during his lifetime was Shi Tsung from 1521 to 1566. And Han says that this emperor supported a retinue of Taoist alchemists in a prolonged search for the elixir of immortality, and for 20 years withdrew almost entirely from governmental care. And so this was an emperor who really didn't run the empire, but withdrew into this Taoist search for an elixir of immortality. And then he was followed, well, let's see, not immediately followed. There must have been someone in between. But anyway, from 1572 to 1620, Emperor Shenzong was even more inattentive. He essentially withdrew and left government up to his underlings who were unpopular. The Ming emperors did not tolerate dissent, disagreement and protest and so on. And so the author of Monkey veiled his satire on government and bureaucracy. He did it by putting it sort of at a distance, this author points out. So the government bureaucracy is located up above in heaven or down below in the underworld or in the demons' domains. It's not the real, so to speak, human government of the novel that is corrupt and so on. And also, of course, the novel is not set during the Ming Dynasty, but during the Tang Dynasty, centuries before. And even the court of the 7th century Tang Dynasty is depicted with respect, treated with respect, the way it's depicted. So he doesn't even really target, this government of hundreds of years ago. Government is depicted as weak. Again, it's the government at a remove, the government of the heavens, for example. Law is depicted as unjust. For example, Monkey is always getting off lightly for, outrageous offenses. Sandy and Pigsy have been punished outlandishly for their mild offenses. The bureaucracies of heaven and the underworld are depicted as corrupt. They're subject to bribes and changing records and so on and so forth. The ruling class in heaven, the celestial ruling class in Buddhist and Taoist heaven, they're depicted as pleasure-seeking people and, beings, and as indifferent to human struggle. And so that's part of his the target of his satire. During Wu's lifetime, more interesting cultural context, during Wu's lifetime, there was a Taoist-led purge of Buddhists. They confiscated Buddhists' property. In the palace, they destroyed the Buddhist temple in the palace, and they destroyed Buddhist imagery. They built, throughout China, I believe they built Taoist temples, and they would execute officials who opposed them. And so during Wu's lifetime, the Taoists were sort of taking it to the Buddhists. And that's reflected in the novel. This author, Sherman Han, points out, quote, "The satire on the Taoist persecutions of the Buddhists is especially explicit in the case of the Cart-Slow Kingdom," that's chapters 22 to 24 in our version of the book. Cart-Slow Kingdom. This is where the Taoists have hoodwinked the king. They've enslaved the Buddhist monks. Out of 2,000 Buddhist monks, only 500 have survived when Monkey and the others arrive and set things straight. And so, okay, next slide. I found an interesting article about interpreting Monkey as a comedy, as a comic novel. And so it's actually by the same guy, isn't it? Sherman Hahn. The comic devices in Shiyuchi, or Monkey. And he identifies 4 main comic approaches in Monkey: witticism, colloquialism, portrayal of human weakness, and irony. Now, unfortunately, the article I found only addresses the last 2 of those 4 comic approaches. He published another article that I haven't been able to find about witticism and colloquialism. So this article focuses on these comic devices portraying human weakness and using irony. And so in human weakness, you can see I've listed the things that he says are especially emphasized in Monkey: simple-mindedness, clumsiness, cowardice, childishness, and the lack of self-restraint. He starts out by kind of establishing a framework. We briefly talked at the beginning of the semester about Hobbes and his theory of laughter, his superiority theory. And so Hahn quotes Hobbes, who said, "The apprehension of some deformed thing in another," end quote, "is the main cause of human laughter." And Hobbes said, according to Hahn, "By observing imperfections in other men, people are forced to keep themselves in their own favor, and thus there results a feeling of sudden glory, which is a passion that causes laughter." And we talked about that, like I said, at the beginning of the semester. Observing something that makes the viewer feel suddenly very superior causes laughter. Like, slapstick. If someone falls down a hole, we tend to laugh because we haven't fallen down the hole, so we're superior to that clumsy person. And so Sherman Hahn reminds us of examples like Falstaff in Henry IV, who's a coward and a comic figure. Don Quixote is, obviously, if you're familiar with the work, displays a lot of human weakness. And so he says that Pigsy is the main example of simple-mindedness, although some of the demons are also exhibiting simple-mindedness. Pigsy is also clumsy, and this is funny. Tripitaka embodies cowardice. He's a big coward, and that happens repeatedly. He exhibits extreme fear at the situations and ordeals that they go through. Monkey embodies childishness. For example, often when he's fighting some deity or some demon or whatever, he's very playful about it. It's like a game for him. All of these characters lack restraint, and so Hahn describes, how there are examples of more than one of the 4 pilgrims being unable to control their temper, being unable to control appetites or lustfulness, and so on and so forth. They lack restraint. And then so he addresses irony as well, describes the irony as it comes out in the novel. The irony of nomenclature. Monkey is given a sort of holy name, awakened to vacuity, or emptiness, but he quickly and rather easily amasses tremendous power. So he's not very vacuous. Pigsy gets a holy sort of nickname that means awakened to power, but he's kind of a bumbling, clumsy, not especially powerful person, whatever he is, especially next to Monkey. So they seem to have the wrong names, both of them. The irony, he talks about appearance versus reality, which, as I said on an earlier slide, that things are not what they seem, could be an alternate title of the book almost. Tripitaka is described when he's first introduced as having a heroic appearance, but obviously he's a big coward. Monkey is sort of incongruous. He's a little monkey, except when he's expanded himself. But he has this immense power. He's just a little monkey, but incongruously he has immense power. Pigsy and Sandy are described when they're introduced as looking very ferocious, but they aren't always extremely ferocious, and they're not invincible. He talks about the irony of the contrast between higher and lower worlds. There's sort of the celestial level, the human level, and the demon level. The latter being the lowest level. But some of these demons are kind of virtuous. And he gives examples. I think the examples he gives are not in our abridged version of the novel. Some of the deities of heaven want to get away from heaven and want to go down to the human world, or they're in the human world and they can't be convinced to come back to heaven. The pilgrims, who are moving in a pious direction, or in Tripitaka's case are supposedly very pious already, but they're rather imperfect, and they don't get along very well. And so he says that's ironic. And so it'd be interesting, I'm going to look for that other article where he talks about witticism and colloquialism. I read this article and I wondered, well, what about irreverence? Because that's one of the main features to me. One of the main comic strategies of Monkey is irreverence, right? I mean, the way Monkey talks to Buddha and what pees on his fingers and the way he talks to the Jade Emperor and so on. So there's room for more scholarship, maybe. Next slide here. Interesting article about demonology. I mean, what a great word, demonology, just the word itself. And so an article called Demons, Gods, and Pilgrims, the Demonology of the Shiyu Chi, which again is the novel Monkey by Rob Campany. He identifies certain categories of demons. So, in the middle portion of the novel, they go through a series of ordeals and adventures, and many of them involve encountering demons. And the abridged version of the novel that we have has many more of those episodes and ordeals. The middle has been abridged in our case. But, we didn't want to read 800 pages, I guess. And so there are demons who have risen to their present state through self-cultivation, who have sort of spiritually pulled themselves up by their bootstraps from a lower state to the state of demonhood. There are demons who have fallen into their present state due to misdeed or flaw. So they may have fallen out of official position in the celestial bureaucracy, for example. I skipped something. I'll come back. No, I won't. Never mind. I'm on the right track here. There are lesser demons and animal spirits that serve more important demons as servants or soldiers. Monkey, for example, at one point has an army of monkeys and other animals. They're lesser demons and animal spirits that serve him. And these lesser demons and animal spirits get their powers, what little power they have, thanks to their leader. And there are peaceful animals like the white turtle, which have gained powers through self-cultivation. They're powerful and yet peaceful. There are all these encounters with demons. Many of the episodes are encounters with demons. And he points out that there's a certain structure and sequence to each encounter with a demon. And he calls it a 7-part paradigm. And so it always begins with a description of the site or residence of the demon, where the demon lives, where the demon's lair is, where the demon is located, and so on. And then there is the initial encounter with the demon, and the demon is usually disguised during the initial encounter. There's an initial battle or sequence of battles, which results in a stalemate or even defeat of the pilgrims. And then the pilgrims locate the demon's master, which might be a member of the Taoist pantheon or a member of the Buddhist pantheon. The master is usually unaware of the antics of their subordinate, this demon. And then they subjugate the demon. And then they integrate the demon into the cosmic order. So rather than slaying the demon and snuffing out its life, they integrate it into cosmic order. They reconcile it with the cosmos. And that fits the overall theme of the novel of redemption. And so this author points out that the demons and the pilgrims, who, except for Tripitaka, the pilgrims are former demons. Anyway, the demons and the pilgrims depend on one another. The pilgrims earn good karma by vanquishing the demons, while serving as catalysts to the demons' redemption with the help of their celestial masters. And so there's this sort of interdependence between the demons and the pilgrims.